Varys was never one to rush. Patience had always been his greatest ally, and it served him well as he slipped silently through the torchlit corridors of the Red Keep. His feet made scarcely a whisper on the cold stone floors, and the faint rustle of his robes was drowned by the distant echoes of footfalls and whispered conversations that drifted through the castle. Rumor and intrigue were the lifeblood of this place, and for a man like Varys, they provided the foundation of all his power. He had spent his life cultivating a network of whisperers, earning the trust of urchins and servants alike, trading favors, gleaning secrets from the unsuspecting. Now, after years of watching lords maneuver for power while kings rose and fell, he believed the time had come to shape the realm more directly than ever before. There was another who shared his perspective on power, albeit with a style far different. Petyr Baelish, known to many as Littlefinger, was a master of manipulation, a man who had ascended from modest origins to a seat at the table of the most powerful in Westeros. He had once controlled the finances of the realm and held Harrenhal in name, though the cursed castle was more an emblem of status than a seat of comfort or true power. Still, Baelish had always thrived on illusions and carefully engineered circumstances. Though he and Varys had never fully trusted each other, the game had shifted around them in such a way that they found themselves drawn together by a common interest. They each wanted a future where they did not merely serve the throne, they wanted to occupy it. Or at least to install someone they both could control so completely that it might as well have been themselves on that great, uncomfortable seat of melted swords. They did not arrive at this point in a single day or on a single night. It had been the result of years of carefully cultivated secrets, cryptic alliances, and small betrayals that never quite rose to the level of outright treason. Both men enjoyed the art of playing puppet master, but each had always thought of himself as the sole grand conductor of the realm. Yet circumstances had changed. War after war, usurpers rising and falling, the Targaryens all but obliterated save for one rumored queen across the narrow sea. The Baratheons splintered among themselves, the Lannisters still desperately clinging to power through a child king and the cunning of Queen Regent Cersei. The Tyrells always watchful, and the Martells biding their time in Dorne. There were too many players, too many armies battered by recent conflicts, too many old feuds rekindled and new alliances tested. In that shifting maze, Varys and Littlefinger had discovered an opportunity as precarious as it was tantalizing. In a low-lit chamber tucked away in the labyrinthine passages beneath the Red Keep, they met in secret more often than anyone suspected. Beneath the castle, there were places where no one ventured, where the stone walls still whispered of bygone eras, of kings and dragons now long dead. Littlefinger would arrive first at times, leaning casually against a cold wall, his fine doublet and mocking smile setting him apart from the shadows. Other times Varys would already be there, seated on a stone bench with his hands folded, his expression serene, only his eyes revealing the swift calculations happening behind them. These clandestine meetings became their council of two, where the idea of forging an alliance to seize the Iron Throne took shape. They were not yet foolhardy enough to imagine that either of them could march openly into the throne room and declare themselves sovereign without support. Westeros was a land in love with its banners and bloodlines. Nobles made endless arguments about legitimacy and the rights of the highborn. Yet both conspirators knew that most who used the word legitimate were easily swayed by the promise of gold, the threat of blackmail, or the sweet elixir of influence. Power was a subtle force. It was not always about leading an army to the gates of King's Landing. Sometimes, the sword was hidden behind a cloak. Sometimes, the victory was sealed with a whispered rumor that would force a great lord's hand to your service without a drop of blood spilled. Littlefinger, for all his brazen ambition, recognized that a new war for the throne would not serve his ends if it arrived too early. He had watched as the War of the Five Kings had ravaged the kingdom, leaving farmland burnt, cities half destroyed, and the Iron Throne weaker than ever. Meanwhile, new threats brewed across the sea. It was bad for commerce, and commerce was one of his stepping stones to power. Varys, with his little birds, had gleaned whispers of dragons returning under the banner of Daenerys Targaryen far to the east. Though that might have been nothing more than rumor, it was enough to keep most lords looking over their shoulders. Amid this swirling chaos, Varys and Littlefinger planned not a frontal assault, but a slow, quiet infiltration of minds, hearts, and gold reserves. Whether they intended to place one of themselves upon the throne at the final step or to puppet a pliable figurehead was a question they left for later. The immediate goal was to control enough pieces of the puzzle that, when the time came, everyone else would scramble for scraps. Their partnership was not one born of mutual admiration. Each had a healthy fear of the other. Varys suspected, quite rightly, that Littlefinger would betray him at the first profitable opportunity. Littlefinger knew Varys was skilled at playing the long game, weaving alliances with an almost inhuman patience. Yet necessity forced them to trust each other, if only partly. Each was indispensable to the other. Varys had the network of whisperers that spanned from the gutters of Flea Bottom to the courts of Pentos and beyond. Littlefinger had the acumen for acquiring wealth, forging covert deals, and persuading noble houses to dance like puppets on his strings. Together, they could plan in two directions at once. One gathering secrets, the other forging practical means of bribery or blackmail. No one in Westeros was better equipped to create the illusions and half-truths that would unravel the loyalties holding up House Lannister's precarious rule. The first step was dividing the Lannisters from their key allies. The Tyrells had nearly as much gold as the Lannisters, if not more. They had married Margaery to King Joffrey, only for Joffrey to meet his end abruptly at his own wedding feast. Rumors circulated about who had orchestrated that murder. Many whispered the Queen of Thorns had been involved, perhaps even Peter Baelish himself. Then young Tommen Baratheon had ascended, a boy far more malleable than his brother had ever been, and Margaery Tyrell became queen once more. Under her gentle guidance, Tommen was sweet and eager to please. Under Cersei's watchful gaze, he was timid and uncertain. For a time, House Lannister seemed stabilized by the Tyrell marriage. But that stability was fragile, dependent on the good favor of Margaery's ambitious grandmother, Lady Olenna Tyrell, and on the gold that still came from the Tyrell strongholds. Littlefinger understood that if the Tyrells abandoned the Lannisters, King's Landing would be defenseless in terms of finances and supply. But to pry open that alliance would require cunning. Lady Olenna was a formidable figure who already suspected Littlefinger's cunning. Varys, on the other hand, held no illusions that she was naive. She was the sort of woman who knew more than she let on, and if they were to undermine the Lannister-Tyrell bond, they had to exploit a weakness that could sway Olenna or Margaery away from supporting the boy king's mother, Queen Regent Cersei. They would need a scandal, a rumor so potent that it would either make the Tyrells fear ruin or promise them greater gains than they already had. Such a rumor was not impossible to craft. Varys had numerous spies in Highgarden and the surrounding lands. He had gleaned tidbits that House Tyrell's hold on some of their bannermen was not as secure as it appeared. A number of lesser lords bristled under Tyrell dominance, complaining they were expected to provide men and supplies without receiving the recognition they deserved. Perhaps an opportunity could be found there. Perhaps the Tyrells could be presented with a crisis that made them reconsider their position in King's Landing. If the Tyrells were forced to choose between standing alone against a rebellious cluster of their own vassals and seeking a new, more beneficial arrangement in King's Landing, one guaranteed by, say, Peter Baelish and the Crown, they might be open to certain deals that weakened the alliance with the Lannisters. As the weeks dragged on, Littlefinger arranged for subtle manipulations among the Tyrell bannermen. Anonymous letters arrived at the keeps of small lords in the Reach, their contents carefully crafted. Lines of flattery about a certain lord's bravery in the recent wars, a mention of how the Tyrells had overlooked or undervalued that lord's sacrifice, and then an offer of gold if that lord would simply encourage dissent in Highgarden's court. Not overt rebellion, merely a protest, a complaint about taxes, or an appeal for greater autonomy. A few lesser lords, uncertain of these letters and mindful that defying the Tyrells was dangerous, considered ignoring them. But gold was persuasive, and these letters came with small deliveries of coin to show good faith. Soon enough, small fires of discontent began to smolder in distant corners of the Reach, and it was only a matter of time before Lady Olenna would catch wind of it. Varys, for his part, orchestrated rumors in King's Landing. He let slip, through carefully chosen channels, that Lord Mace Tyrell was growing bored of propping up a boy king. Whispers suggested Mace might want to crown himself or push Tommen aside for Margaery's child should she conceive. Other whispers insinuated that Cersei was quietly investigating the Tyrell family for signs of treason, that she believed they had orchestrated Joffrey's death, or that Margaery might be seducing not only the king but influential lords at court to gather more power. These seeds of rumor were contradictory, but that was precisely the point. Confusion was a potent tool. By the time these rumors spread through the Red Keep and across King's Landing, no one knew which version to believe. Tensions arose between Cersei and Margaery, already uneasy allies. Cersei's paranoia deepened. Margaery's eyes turned warily toward her new mother-in-law. The Tyrell name began to elicit hushed conversations about loyalty and ambition. All the while, Varys glided through the halls, his face a mask of polite interest, as if these developments surprised him as much as anyone else. Meanwhile, the conspirators also needed to address the other great powers in Westeros. The North was in turmoil, with the Starks mostly scattered or presumed dead. The Vale was under Petyr Baelish's guardianship of young Lord Robert Arryn. The Riverlands lay in ruin after the wars. The Iron Islands were restless, always seeking a chance to reave or conquer. Dorne stood apart, still smoldering with resentment over Prince Oberyn's death and the historical grievances against the Lannisters. Each region had a part to play in the grand game. Littlefinger's hold over the Vale gave him a base of power, though it was subtle. He had the ear of its lords through young Robert Arryn, whose delicate health and fragile mind made him easily manipulated. Varys, in turn, had contacts in every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, so that any threat or move might be anticipated. Baelish's presence in the Vale was a perfect stepping stone for larger ambitions. Many lords of the Vale still remembered how Eddard Stark was betrayed after coming south, and they bore no love for the Lannisters who had executed him. In theory, the Vale was sworn to the Iron Throne, but in practice those lords were cautious. The Bloodgate and the Eyrie were formidable defenses that could keep out entire armies. If Baelish could unify the Vale under the promise of a more stable throne, one that would reward them instead of burden them, he might raise a strong force that could be used to influence the outcome of future battles. It was not about marching on King's Landing immediately, of course. That would be too blatant. Instead, Littlefinger spread enough gold and favor in the Vale to ensure that if ever King's Landing demanded troops from them, the Vale lords would hesitate or claim difficulties. Perhaps a harsh winter, bandits in the mountains, or some other contrived excuse. Baelish wanted the Vale's swords available for his own aims, not to spill their blood for a Lannister or even a Baratheon cause. While all these threads were being pulled, the Lannisters themselves struggled with internal conflicts. Queen Cersei, though still regent, was losing support among the nobles due to her paranoia and her inability to navigate the complexities of the court without Tywin Lannister at her side. Jaime Lannister was off in the field or dealing with other matters, never quite comfortable in King's Landing. Tyrion Lannister had fled across the sea after being accused of regicide. The Lannister name was tarnished, their gold mines rumored to be running dry, though many still held them in fearful respect. Varys and Littlefinger fanned the flames of the Lannisters' difficulties, careful to never let themselves be seen as the ones striking the sparks. Letters, rumors, forged messages, and petty manipulations forced the Lannisters to dance from crisis to crisis, never fully able to refocus their attention on the broader politics shaping the realm. On one particular evening, Varys and Littlefinger convened in that secret chamber beneath the Red Keep to tally their progress. A single lantern cast their long shadows against the rough stone walls. Varys wore his usual soft slippers, and his robe swished slightly as he moved. Littlefinger stood with one hand resting lightly on his dagger's pommel, though it was more a habit of pose than a threat. He liked to toy with that dagger, to keep his counterpart reminded of the unspoken danger that lay between them. Varys paid it no mind. Lord Tyrell has withdrawn somewhat from court. Varys began in his calm, measured tone. He claims to be attending to urgent matters in Highgarden. His absence leaves Margaery to handle court appearances alongside the king and queen regent. One suspects she might be more amenable to certain suggestions without her father's presence. Littlefinger inclined his head in interest. She does love the adoration of the people, doesn't she? Philanthropy and charm, that's her way. But the moment she starts to suspect her family's threatened, she'll hold tight to them. We should be careful not to drive them too far. Indeed, said Varys. If we feed her enough reason to fear that the Queen Regent's paranoia will lead to an accusation of treason, she may look for an alternate power base within the city, especially if she senses her father's hold on the Tyrell bannermen is weakening. She might be persuaded to build alliances outside her family's usual circle. As you know, I have a few prospective supporters in mind. Littlefinger smirked. Such as the Master of Coin, perhaps? A cunning figure, though I'm told he's not to be trusted. He lifted his eyebrows in feigned innocence. Varys's expression was unreadable. We must ensure it appears an attractive option to her. She has no reason to trust me either, but I can nudge her in the right direction if the right whispers find her ear. Let her think she's forging her own path. And what of Cersei? Littlefinger asked. She's coiled tighter than a spring these days, and if she lashes out too soon, it might cause chaos we can't control. We can deal with Cersei in due time, Varys replied softly. If the Tyrells withdraw their support from the crown, or even threaten to do so, Cersei will have fewer allies to rely on. She'll make mistakes born of panic. We just need to guide her choices so she makes precisely the mistakes we want her to. Littlefinger nodded. For a moment, he allowed himself to contemplate how far they had come. Alliances, plots, secrets. These were all tools he had used in the past to achieve wealth and power, but now they were poised to do something far more ambitious. He found a thrill in the idea that they might actually place themselves in ultimate authority. His mind flickered to the image of the Iron Throne, that mass of twisted steel. He did not necessarily desire to sit upon it in full regalia. No, that might be too obvious, too dangerous. But to hold the strings of the occupant, that appealed to him greatly. Perhaps he could find a puppet with a legitimate claim, someone no one would suspect was being controlled. Varys, for his part, probably had a different vision. But for now, they aligned well enough to keep the dream alive. The next few months were a tapestry of subtle maneuvers. Word came that rebellions or near rebellions simmered in the Reach. Not enough to challenge the Tyrells outright, but enough to force Mace Tyrell to remain in Highgarden longer than he wished. The lords in question were men who had quietly received coin from unknown benefactors, delivered by masked riders and hush-money channels that ultimately led back to Littlefinger. To quell these simmering discontents, Mace needed to deploy troops and funds, all the while ignoring the fact that he was distancing himself from the power center at King's Landing. This inevitably caused friction with Cersei, who expected the Tyrells to maintain their presence at court and their supply lines to the city. Varys ensured that each of Cersei's demands reached Mace Tyrell in the most insulting or heavy-handed manner possible, forging or doctoring official seals as needed, so it appeared the Queen Regent was issuing edicts that undermined Tyrell authority. The rift grew, and Margaery found herself caught between her birth family and her royal family. Soon, Margaery's frustration with Cersei led her to confide in trusted ladies-in-waiting, who happened to be in Varys's pay. One or two gentle suggestions from these ladies led Margaery to wonder if the Master of Coin could help ease some financial burdens by redirecting certain funds in ways that would benefit the Tyrells. Margaery approached Baelish discreetly, explaining how the crown's finances might be leveraged to keep the Tyrell bannermen placated, how such an arrangement would also keep Mace happy at Highgarden, and how it might ensure that the royal coffers remained stable. Littlefinger feigned sympathy and promised to do all in his power to assist the young queen. He lamented the complexities of the realm's debts, the unfortunate scarcity of gold, but promised to investigate solutions. Margaery left these meetings feeling hopeful, as though she had found a cunning friend at court who had her family's best interests at heart. In the meantime, Varys met quietly with a handful of merchants who had reason to dislike the Tyrell monopoly on food supplies coming into King's Landing. He hinted that if they publicly criticized certain Tyrell demands, perhaps spoke of price gouging or accused the Tyrell bannermen of overtaxing the farmland, then the Queen's reputation might be tarnished and there could be an opening for them to gain more favorable trade terms. The merchants, ever hungry for profit, agreed to spread such complaints. Margaery found herself beset by sniping from both the Lannisters and from the city's merchants. She turned again to Petyr Baelish, who commiserated and told her he would do everything in his power to quell the unrest. Of course, he had fanned those flames in the first place. The cycle of manipulation tightened its coils around the city. While the Tyrell Lannister bond frayed, Varys also nudged certain lords in the Crownlands and Stormlands to start reconsidering their allegiances. The Stormlands, once fiercely loyal to House Baratheon, had splintered after Stannis Baratheon's war efforts waned. Many of the Stormlords were uneasy about the Lannisters' control over young Tommen, but they feared retribution if they spoke out. Varys sent coded messages to suggest that a new order in King's Landing might bring them more autonomy and greater favor. He let them believe that if they withheld open support for the crown, they might be rewarded once the current regime collapsed under its own weight. Some lords were too cautious to respond, but others, especially those with fewer lands or in precarious positions, showed interest. Even the slightest tilt in loyalty could prove critical in the grand design. Littlefinger busied himself forging or purchasing alliances with the crown's own guards and officials. He spent lavishly to secure the loyalty of a few gold cloaks captains, men who were eager for coin or advancement. He whispered that when the time came, their cooperation would be remembered, and that great rewards might flow to those who acted swiftly on his behalf. None of these captains suspected the true nature of his scheme, but the seeds were sown. The City Watch had once turned on Ned Stark in the blink of an eye at Littlefinger's command. There was no reason they couldn't shift allegiance again if properly motivated. Over time, one by one, those in strategic positions, quartermasters, gatekeepers, a handful of the Red Keep stewards, found themselves indebted to or intimidated by Baelish's network of incentives and threats. Varys, for his part, did not place undue trust in Littlefinger's expansions. He knew that a man who could bribe a guard to serve him could bribe that same guard to turn on him, if the price were right. Therefore, Varys also cultivated his own watchers. Children who worked in the kitchens, stable boys, laundry servants, and others who would not normally draw suspicion. They relayed any sign that Littlefinger or his people were orchestrating something that might undercut Varys himself. So far, it seemed the arrangement held, though each man kept a quiet ledger of opportunities to betray the other if the path to ultimate power demanded it. The realm grew more restless. The small folk rarely knew the causes of their hardships, but they felt the tension, the rising cost of bread, the hush in the air when certain lords rode through the city. Cersei, convinced that traitors lurked everywhere, tried to tighten her grip on the city. She threatened the merchants who complained too loudly, forced the gold cloaks to conduct search after search for seditious materials, and sometimes had visitors to the Red Keep detained on flimsy grounds. These moves only fanned the flames of discontent. Soon, graffiti mocking the Queen Regent appeared on alley walls. The faith militant, newly emboldened by the Crown's attempts to placate the High Sparrow, policed the streets with zeal, punishing sins real or imagined, adding another layer of anxiety to the city. Varys and Littlefinger watched the chaos grow with cool detachment, each carefully measuring how to harness it. Marjorie, walking a tightrope between her love for the people's affection and her fear of Cersei's retaliation, relied ever more on Littlefinger's counsel. In private, she expressed her belief that the realm's finances were in peril, that the Lannister gold was not as plentiful as it once was, and that if something wasn't done, the city might starve or riot. Baelish agreed, confiding that he too worried for the stability of the crown. He hinted that if the Queen Regent continued on her current course, the city could be enveloped in bloodshed, and that in such a crisis, it might be best for Marjorie to position herself as a voice of reason. When Marjorie asked for more specifics, Baelish only smiled. "In these uncertain times, my queen, it's wise to have a plan for every possibility," he said. "And if the crown itself should become vacant or otherwise compromised, you must think of who will hold it next." Marjorie, though cunning, was not so bold as to speak openly of displacing Tommen. She did not want harm to come to him, for she found the boy kind-hearted compared to his brother. But she also recognized the possibility that he could be used by his mother to drag the Tyrells into ruin. She sought a way to protect him from Cersei's more volatile impulses, to ensure that if a crisis fell upon King's Landing, she and her family would not end up on the gallows. So she pressed Littlefinger for more subtle reassurances. The seeds of a wedge between her loyalty to House Lannister and her loyalty to the crown were planted. Baelish, as always, gave her just enough hope that he might arrange a bloodless transition of power if it came to that. He asked her to keep their conversations secret. She agreed, feeling she had no other choice. During this same period, Varys quietly left the city on diplomatic journeys, traveling in disguise to meet with certain lords who had once served the Targaryens or the Baratheons. He hinted that a new claimant might arise soon, a claimant who would unite the realm without the corruption or cruelty that had so damaged the Lannisters' reputation. Some of these lords were intrigued by the possibility of a Targaryen restoration. Others, jaded by the repeated conflicts, only wanted stability. Varys offered them all the same pitch. Soon, a shift would occur in King's Landing. Those who were ready to adapt quickly would be rewarded with positions and lands in the new order. Those who clung to the old ways might find themselves isolated when the crown's supporters lost their foothold. These lords, uncertain but tempted, listened carefully. Many pledged to remain neutral until Varys gave the signal that the time was ripe to choose a side. They believed he was acting as an agent for a potential new monarch, perhaps Daenerys Targaryen. They did not suspect that Varys and Baelish might be orchestrating something far less straightforward. Upon returning to King's Landing, Varys learned that Cersei's paranoia had led her to employ Qyburn in new ways. Qyburn's experiments and dark rumors of what he did in the depths of the Red Keep unsettled many. The whispers said he was creating monstrous things, men robbed of their wills, or something even more horrific. The Queen Regent believed these secret projects might give her an advantage against her enemies, real or imagined. Varys took note. If Cersei had a new weapon, the conspirators had to be prepared. Varys informed Littlefinger of this development, though he was careful not to reveal all he knew. There were some secrets even allies might exploit. As the friction in the realm rose, the moment drew near when a spark could set off a larger blaze. Varys and Littlefinger knew they had to control that spark. They needed a single event that would shatter the fragile alliances still propping up the Lannisters. More than that, they needed to position themselves as the best hope for ending the chaos. The realm was tired of war, fearful of further devastation. If, at the right moment, Varys and Littlefinger presented an alternative, a new order, the exhausted lords and small folk might welcome it. They chose to orchestrate a crisis involving the Faith Militant, the High Sparrow, and the Crown. The Faith's growing power had already ensnared Cersei once, forcing her to do a penance walk, humiliating her in front of the city. Though she had regained some measure of authority, her relationship with the Faith was tenuous at best. Meanwhile, Margaery had also been imprisoned and then released, but the scars of that event lingered. It was easy to imagine that, with a bit of manipulation, the Faith might once again clash violently with the Crown. Such an event would rattle King's Landing to its core. Littlefinger introduced an anonymous donation of considerable gold to the Faith, delivered by a courier who claimed to speak for a devout noble who wished to see the Faith Militant expanded to safeguard the city's morality. At the same time, Varys's whisperers spread the rumor that the Queen Regent, in her private capacity, was mocking the High Sparrow's humility and his followers' sincerity. A story circulated that Cersei considered the Faith a band of beggars dressed in rags, hungry for power they did not deserve. Incensed by these rumors, the Faith Militant doubled their patrols, harassing whores, merchants selling wine, and anyone perceived as a sinner. This crackdown made life even more difficult for the small folk, who started to grumble that the king and queen had allowed religious zealots to take over the streets. Then, with exquisite timing, a riot broke out in Flea Bottom, instigated by men in plain clothing who had been paid to agitate the Faith Militant. The Sparrows responded with merciless force. Blood was spilled in the alleys of King's Landing. Word reached the Red Keep that the Faith had turned on the people. Chaos threatened to consume the city once more, reminiscent of the riots that had occurred under King Joffrey. Cersei, outraged, demanded the Gold Cloaks restore order by any means necessary. Tommen, caught between his mother, his wife, and his fear of the Faith, vacillated until too late. The violence spread. Margaery pleaded for calm, but her voice was drowned out by the clash of arms. The faith militants saw the gold cloaks as agents of a corrupt crown. The gold cloaks, for their part, had grown more loyal to Baelish's coin than to the Lannisters. They waded into battle half-heartedly, uncertain of whose orders to follow. Skirmishes broke out across the city. In the midst of this confusion, Varys and Littlefinger made their move. Under the guise of seeking to protect the royal family, Baelish coaxed Margaery, Tommen, and a retinue of guards to a secure location, supposedly to keep them safe from the riot. He led them to Maegor's Holdfast, a fortress within the Red Keep. Cersei remained elsewhere in the castle, attempting to rally what guards she could. The confusion escalated when a portion of the gold cloaks turned on each other, some claiming loyalty to the Queen Regent, others obeying Baelish's men. While the main gates and corridors were choked with conflict, Varys coordinated with certain of his agents to whisk Tommen away. The boy king was frightened, disoriented. Margaery tried to keep him calm, but she herself was unsure who was really in control. Baelish kept them surrounded by his own loyal guard, claiming it was for their protection, but it effectively separated them from Cersei's influence. Varys, slipping through hidden passages known only to him, orchestrated the next crucial step. He needed to ensure that Cersei could not easily regain control. Through a series of signals, coded knocks on walls, and whispered instructions, he directed the small group of hidden watchers he had placed throughout the Red Keep to block or sabotage certain corridors. Piles of debris and collapsed sections suddenly made movement difficult for the Queen Regent's forces. At the same time, the passage leading from Maegor's Holdfast to the outside was kept clear, allowing Baelish's men to spirit Tommen and Margaery away, if needed. The faith militants' violence, stoked by rumor and gold, had achieved its purpose. King's Landing was on the brink of meltdown. Littlefinger, stepping into the courtyard where a handful of disoriented gold cloaks lingered, offered them triple their usual wages if they would follow him and disarm any sparrows still roaming the grounds. In the name of the king, he declared a state of emergency. The king, after all, was safe in his custody, though in truth, the boy had no idea what was happening. Meanwhile, Cersei, cornered in a section of the Red Keep with Qyburn and a few loyal knights, raged at the betrayal. She did not fully understand who had orchestrated this chaos, but she suspected both Varys and Littlefinger. She ordered Qyburn's creation, the towering silent knight known as Ser Robert Strong, to prepare to cut a path through any who stood in their way. A handful of Lannister guards still remained fiercely loyal, yet they were outnumbered and disorganized. As news reached them that the city was in uproar, that Tommen had effectively vanished into Baelish's custody, Cersei's fury and fear reached a tipping point. She might have mounted a desperate charge to save her son had the labyrinth of blocked corridors and sworn swords not trapped her. During a lull in the fighting, Littlefinger arranged for a delegacy of uncertain lords, men from the Vale, the Crownlands, and a few opportunists from the Reach, to assemble in the throne room. He promised them an urgent announcement regarding the fate of the crown. The throne room was guarded by the gold cloaks loyal to him, ensuring that none of Cersei's or Qyburn's forces could slip in easily. Amid the stench of fear and the lingering echoes of battle in the city streets, these lords and knights stood in uneasy confusion, waiting to see what fresh surprise the Master of Coin would reveal. Varys appeared at Littlefinger's side, gliding in with silent grace. It was the first time many realized that the Spider and Littlefinger were working together. To set the stage, Varys spoke calmly to the gathering. He explained that the city was under siege, not from foreign invaders, but from internal chaos, fueled by a faith militant gone mad and a queen regent who had lost her grip on reality. He cited rumors that Cersei planned to execute members of the faith by the hundreds, that she sought to burn parts of the city if it meant preserving her own power. No one could confirm or deny this in the moment, and the confusion of the riot lent his words a certain plausibility. Littlefinger then addressed the lords, explaining that King Tommen was safe in his custody, but that the child king was too terrified to rule without guidance. Margaery stood nearby, pale-faced and trembling with anger and fear, uncertain of whether to refute Baelish or accept his protection. She loved Tommen in her own way, or at least pitied him, but she was no fool. She began to understand that Baelish was engineering a takeover. Yet even now, she could see the advantage in letting him speak. If it would protect Tommen from Cersei's madness, perhaps it was necessary. Littlefinger painted himself and Varys as saviors, men who had foreseen the crisis and prepared to shield the king. He urged the lords to recognize that the rightful authority in King's Landing now lay in the council of those who truly had the realm's best interest at heart. He offered to restore order and end the violence, on the condition that the lords recognize a new council, one that would set aside the Queen Regent's power for the safety of the realm. The High Sparrow and his faith militant would be put down, or else forced to negotiate a truce that did not threaten the city. All we ask, Littlefinger said with a humble bow, is that the realm's lords acknowledge the need for strong and enlightened leadership in these dark times. Murmurs spread among the assembled. Some suspected treachery, yet they were surrounded by guards apparently loyal to Baelish, and they knew the faith militant rampaged outside. The small folk, from what they had heard, were turning on the monarchy. The Queen Regent might be seconds from unleashing more horrors. Right or wrong, this might be their only chance to prevent a complete collapse of order. One by one, they found themselves nodding. Some did so willingly, seeing a chance for advancement. Others, more reluctant, feared defiance would end badly. Varys locked eyes with each lord, a hint of a smile playing at his lips, as though to assure them that this was the only logical choice. After they reached a precarious consensus, the next step was to publicize this new council's authority to the city. The gold cloaks fanned out, pinning proclamations to doors, reading them aloud on street corners. Tommen was still king, the proclamations said, but until he came of age, a special council led by the Master of Coin and the Master of Whisperers would see to the stability of the realm. The Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister, was deemed unfit to govern and placed under immediate investigation for crimes of negligence, tyranny, and the endangerment of the realm. The faith militant was declared a rogue order unless they put down their arms at once. Any who resisted would be considered traitors. The small folk, seeing a chance that the bloodshed might end, watched anxiously to see if this new arrangement would restore peace. Some were relieved, thinking that if Baelish and Varys were truly in control, at least bread might be cheaper, or the city might be calmer. Others mistrusted the pair, calling them serpents in the darkness. Regardless, the city was too exhausted to keep fighting. Many of the sparrows had no wish to die fighting trained soldiers, and seeing the tide turn in Baelish's favor, they began laying down their arms, demanding only that the poor be cared for. The gold cloaks, emboldened by a promise of higher wages, forced those who resisted into retreat or capture. Cersei herself was cornered in the Red Keep, with only a handful of loyalists. She refused to surrender. She stood in a corridor with Ser Robert Strong at her side, her golden hair still short from her penance walk, her eyes ablaze. When a small company of Baelish's men arrived, Qyburn at her side hissed at them to stay back. But the men parted, revealing Varys behind them, expression tranquil. He gave Cersei the slightest bow. "Your Grace," he murmured. "I regret that it has come to this." She spat at him. "You dare show your face after this betrayal, eunuch? Do you think I won't have your head for it?" Ser Robert Strong took a menacing step forward, but more gold cloaks rushed in, crossbows trained on the towering knight. Even so, some men flinched at his imposing figure. Cersei glared, her fists clenched. "I am the Queen Regent. You will all die screaming for this treason." Varys sighed softly. "Your Grace, your own choices have brought us here. But I promise you, no harm need come to you if you relinquish your authority." Cersei's eyes flicked from Varys to Qyburn, then to the men with crossbows. She was cornered, but not broken. "I will never bend the knee to that petty upstart Baelish, nor to you, Spider. Tommen is my son, and he will not be your puppet." At that moment, footsteps approached from behind Varys's line of guards. Peter Baelish himself emerged, calm, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of his dagger. He looked upon Cersei with a thin smile. "Your Grace, I understand your anger, but the city is in chaos. Your actions have unfortunately contributed to that. For the sake of King Tommen, for the sake of the realm, we must ensure stability." Cersei's laugh was a brittle sound. You speak of the realm like it's a whore you can buy, Littlefinger. That's all you understand, gold and cunning. But you forget I still have allies. My family will come for me, and they will raze this place to the ground if you harm me or my son. Baelish sighed. I'm afraid your family's hold is not what it once was. The Tyrells are distancing themselves from you. The gold mines no longer flow. Your brother Jaime is far away, and your father Tywin is long dead. If you force a standoff, it will only lead to more bloodshed, more resentment toward your name. Let us bring you somewhere safe, where you can reflect on this without endangering your life or Tommen's throne. Cersei's nostrils flared. You would lock me in a cell as the Faith did. Do you expect me to kneel before you as I had to kneel before that barefoot preacher? I expect you to show wisdom, Baelish replied. If not for your own sake, then for Tommen's. The council has declared you unfit to govern for the time being. Surrender peacefully, and you might retain some dignity. Resist, and I cannot promise your survival. Her gaze shifted to Ser Robert Strong, who stood ready. She might have been ready to unleash him upon them, to carve a path out of the keep. Perhaps she could flee King's Landing, gather Lannister forces, and retake the city. But even as her face twisted with hatred, she saw the line of crossbows, the glimmer in Baelish's eyes, and the calm certainty in Varys's stance. If she commanded Ser Robert Strong to attack, she might escape momentarily, but the city was lost. Tommen was effectively their hostage. For all her pride, she saw no quick path to victory. She stood there, trembling with rage, searching for a solution that did not exist. At last, she let out a hiss of breath. You are all cowards. This entire city is full of traitors. Very well, take me then. But if a single hair on Tommen's head is harmed, Baelish offered a slight bow. Your Grace, Tommen will remain perfectly safe in our care. Please, come with us. He gestured to his men, who stepped forward. Ser Robert Strong tensed, but at Cersei's slight nod, he did not attack. The Queen Regent was disarmed and escorted away, Qyburn following behind, fear etched on his features. She was taken to more comfortable quarters than a dungeon cell, but still under guard, effectively prisoner. The realm would later hear that she had been relieved of her duties, pending an inquiry into the fiasco with the Faith militant. With Cersei neutralized, the city under the watch of the Gold Cloaks loyal to Baelish, and the Faith militant quelled by a combination of fear and exhaustion, Varys and Littlefinger solidified their grip on King's Landing. Margaery Tyrell found herself in a complicated position. She remained with Tommen, nominally his queen, but the real authority now lay with Baelish and Varys. She worried for her family, but receiving messages from them was difficult. The new council controlled all ravens. For the moment, she played the dutiful queen, staying close to Tommen and assuring him she would protect him. In truth, they were both in the gilded cage of the conspirators' design. The lords who had gathered in the throne room initially believed this temporary arrangement might stabilize the city, that eventually a more traditional regent or hand would be appointed. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Littlefinger and Varys had no intention of relinquishing their hold so easily. They replaced key officials with their own men. They dictated policies on trade, taxes, and the city watch. When letters arrived from other regions, Lord Tyrell, the Lords of the Vale, even Dorne, Varys, and Baelish answered them as though they were the rightful rulers, forging Tommen's name at times or simply issuing decrees in the name of the Special Council for the safety of the realm. Their combined cunning ensured that no single lord could rise up without being swiftly outmaneuvered or bribed. Outside King's Landing, the realm watched in disbelief as word spread that the Queen Regent had been deposed. Some believed this was the rightful action of a concerned council preventing further madness. Others suspected a coup. Yet no one had enough influence or will to mount an immediate challenge. The Tyrells, busy with their own unrest in the Reach, sent cautious feelers, but Mace Tyrell found messages from Margaery that seemed to indicate she was safe for the time being. Perhaps it was better to wait and see how events unfolded rather than march on the capital. The Lannister forces at Casterly Rock were diminished. Jaime was rumored to be dealing with uprisings in the Riverlands. The Martells nursed old grudges but had no reason to intervene on behalf of Cersei. The North was still reeling from the losses of the wars. The Vale was effectively under Littlefinger's thumb. In such a fractured landscape, no immediate rescue for Cersei took shape. Days bled into weeks, then months. Baelish and Varys quietly consolidated their power, all the while assuring the city that King Tommen was the rightful ruler. Tommen, overwhelmed and still essentially a child, allowed them to govern on his behalf. Margaery attempted to exert some influence, but found that each time she proposed a policy or tried to intercede, she was gently steered away. She watched in frustration as the conspirators played the court like master musicians. She tried to appeal to her grandmother, Lady Olenna, but the old woman's letters became increasingly vague, as if uncertain how to handle the new reality in King's Landing. The conspirators were not always in lockstep. They had disagreements in private about the future. Littlefinger saw a path where Tommen might quietly die or be declared unfit, opening the throne to a chosen puppet. Varys was more cautious, preferring to keep Tommen alive and claim their authority was purely to assist the boy king until he came of age. If Tommen died, other claimants, Stannis or Daenerys, might be emboldened to invade. A child king, however, allowed them to rule from the shadows with minimal uproar, at least until their power was unassailable. Their collaboration was a dance of constant negotiation, each seeking advantage but mindful that a direct betrayal would undo everything. An uneasy peace settled over King's Landing. The faith militant receded from the streets. The small folk resumed their daily lives, grateful that the violence had subsided. Bread prices stabilized as Baelish manipulated trade routes, shipping in grain from the Vale and the Riverlands. Varys ensured the distribution was handled with enough fairness to keep the people from revolting. Publicly, the conspirators framed themselves as saviors, having rescued the city from the faith's tyranny and Cersei's caprice. Yet behind the scenes, the walls of the Red Keep whispered of a new tyranny, one that wore a velvet glove but clutched an iron fist beneath it. Still, the question lingered in the halls of power. What would the rest of Westeros do now? Rival claimants, from the Targaryen girl across the sea to any surviving Baratheon or Stark, might see the disarray as an opportunity. Baelish and Varys made preparations to counter such threats. They fortified alliances abroad, using the crown's official capacity to sign new treaties or send envoys promising trade benefits. They built up the gold cloaks into a formidable city army, with strict loyalty to the coin pouches Baelish controlled. They arranged for new taxes on certain goods to fill the treasury, enough that it wouldn't cause a widespread revolt, but enough to pay for expansions of power. Over time, they aimed to project an image of stability and prosperity, so that any outside invader might face a united city, not the chaos that had once plagued King's Landing. What they did not anticipate was the depth of some people's loyalty to the old order, or the cunning of those who sought to exploit the vacuum for their own ends. Secret pockets of resistance began to form around Cersei's cause, mostly Lannister bannermen who still revered the name. They plotted in hushed tones, seeking a way to free the captive Queen Regent. Meanwhile, the High Sparrow, though driven out of the city proper, remained a powerful symbol for the poor and devout. Rumors spread that he was gathering a new flock in the countryside, preaching about the sins of those who seized power through gold and deceit. Nor did the conspirators expect Margaery Tyrell to remain idle. Though outwardly compliant, she was not content to let Baelish and Varys control the realm and her husband. She began to cultivate her own networks. She offered kindness to the servants of the Red Keep, bribed a few of Baelish's guards discreetly, and quietly sent letters to her grandmother, urging the Tyrells to be ready. If a moment came when Baelish and Varys showed weakness, she intended to take it. She was young, but she had learned a great deal in her time among lions and sparrows. One day, she told herself, she would not simply be a pawn in this game. Months into their new regime, Varys and Littlefinger found themselves perched on a knife's edge. They had seized the capital, subdued the royals, and stifled immediate resistance. But they also knew that if they faltered, everything might unravel in a storm of vengeance. Still, they took grim satisfaction in having accomplished what no one else had. Toppling the Queen Regent, effectively ruling the Seven Kingdoms, at least the heart of it, through a puppet king. Their plan to seat themselves on the Iron Throne, or to place a puppet in it permanently, was still in flux. Perhaps they did not even need to physically occupy the throne. In many ways, they already ruled more firmly than Joffrey or Tommen ever had. They controlled the gold, the Whisperers, the City Watch, and thus the fate of the realm. And yet, in quiet moments, each man mused on the possibility of discarding the other. Littlefinger had no intention of sharing the realm's power indefinitely. Varys, for all his talk of the good of the realm, had aims that were not entirely transparent. Each had concealed information from the other. Each was poised to betray at the first sign of necessity. The game was far from over. It had simply evolved into a new phase, one where the entire realm might be shaped to their design or plunge into chaos once again. For now, though, an uneasy quiet settled over the Red Keep, like the hush after a terrible storm. Cersei brooded in her guarded chambers, plotting vengeance. Marjorie cooed over Tommen, while secretly building her own alliances. Baelish and Varys walked the halls like kings in all but name, ever watchful for threats, each wearing a mask of civility toward the other. If there was one absolute truth in the city, it was that no throne was ever fully secure, no peace truly guaranteed, and no alliance invulnerable to betrayal. In the shadows of the Iron Throne, the conspirators watched, waited, and smiled with the knowledge that, at least for the moment, they held the strings of every puppet who danced in King's Landing. They would maintain that grip with the same cunning and patience that had brought them this far. And should the day come when one of them decided that sharing power was no longer an option, the realm would once again be plunged into a turmoil that only the truly cunning could survive. In the Game of Thrones, after all, you won or you died, and these two men were determined never to die.